Hello, everybody. It's Heather with the Leadership at Heart podcast. And today I am Grace with Julie Castro Abrams as my guest. And I just absolutely love the mission she's on, the mission her organization's on as it relates to giving a unique view to how women lead. And I'm just so excited to have you on here, Julie.
I'm excited to be here.
So tell everybody a little bit more about the organization. Like, what do you do? Where are you right now in your leadership journey?
Yeah. Well, I'm the CEO of an organization called How Women Lead. We have 25,000 top corporate women leaders, and we activate all of us to make change together. And so we pass laws, we place women on corporate boards. We sort of do all those things that are like the ceilings that women leaders still have. We collectively come together to break them. But to the point of the name of this podcast and what our focus is on today, I want everybody listening to know there's a life stage called middlescence, and nobody really knows about this. It's a developmental life stage. So you think about all the different developmental stages as kids are growing up, for example. Once you hit your early to mid 40s until, late 60s, you're in a life stage, especially for women, where having an impact and doing things with other women becomes like a biological developmental necessity. So if you're starting to feel this, like, I've got to do something in the world, you're right on time. And in your 20s and 30s and early 40s, I think we're all scaffolding our leadership and maybe raising a family. And I don't know, I don't even remember from about 28 to 30, 42. Like, I was exhausted raising a family and running stuff. But it's very interesting, this life stage, and it's really beautiful to think about what that means. It means cultivating really authentic relationships with other women at your level and really figuring out, like, how can I leave a legacy, which is all heart, if you ask me.
It so is. I love that. And it is, I am at that place, funny enough. I'm an only child, and I've kind of been a really highly self-reliant individual since I was very young, and not a joiner, not a person who, I had a couple friends here and there. I always had like one best friend, and that's about it. And then as I got older, like you said, with kids, my kids were like my crew. So I wasn't fed by other women. I was fed by my children. Right.
Me too.
And now, like, I have two more at home and two have left. And you're kind of like, yeah, I'm feeling like I have more time to invest in other humans, and the female, of course, they get me. They get me. So that's why I'm there.
Let me highlight one more thing about what you just said, which is echoes most of the women I know in my network and myself. I'm an outlier. I, was a CEO of 32, and I mentor everybody else and have always, but you can't really reveal that much of yourself because people don't get it or whatever. I don't know. And sometimes in those very visible public roles like yours, you don't have super powerful peer relationships because you couldn't cultivate them because your kids were your focus, or, in your career, but it starts to become an opportunity and something you really need. And so my whole network is designed around building those deep relationships with people who are absolutely your peers, which is hard to find in general. This is the kind of place where it's like, you're on a corporate board, public company board. Let me introduce you to, 200 women who were also on public company boards. But it's hard to find them if if you haven't built those networks.
Good point. If your head's down, which is what most of us are doing, you're right for the majority of the time.
Yeah.
Really,
And you know what? I think you have to forgive yourself for it too. I think a lot of us have shame that we couldn't build, cultivate those friendships. I have a couple single friends that just gave me so much crap about not being I'm sorry, I have kids. I'm trying to survive. I don't have another minute in the day,
So true. That is exactly how I feel. Yeah, there was that kind of like, oh, I haven't been a very good friend over the years. And I had people over the years who were friends of mine, like, let's say in high school. I'm serious. And they would reach out and I'd be like, nice to see you again. And now I'm moving on because I'm on to my third child, or you know what I mean? And so as I went back to look, I started to feel awful about myself because they were looking for me. They looked me up, they kind of searched me out, and I just didn't have the time to focus on them because it wasn't interesting. I needed to really focus on survival as an only child of four kids,
And they may or may not, Heather, they may or not be who you need right now. You may actually need a different kind of person. You can still be kind to them. Yes. And mentor them. You're very visible, so they probably want to be in your orbit and get something from you. But when you're someone that's got that kind of public visibility and you're so exposed, it's everybody wants a meeting with me. And so I can't meet with everybody physically, it's impossible. So how do you discern and find people where there's going to be an equal exchange and they will get what I'm going through in my journey? So anyway,
Oh, I love
that's
that. I love that.
Ah,
So now that you're leading this, how long have you been leading this organization?
10 years.
Did you found it?
I did. Yeah.
Oh,
It was
very
an
impressive.
accident.
It was
an
what?
accident.
It was an accident. Okay, how'd that happen?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So I was the CEO of something for 11 plus years, and I was exhausted when I was done. And I was like, I'm never running anything again. I'm just going to consult and go on boards and invest. And then a couple of years in, somebody had written a book on the neuroscience of teams, which is kind of an interesting topic. And I thought, well, she wanted to get in front of corporate women. I was like, well, there's all these women that I did stuff with in my last role. Let me bring them together for a lunch. And it was interesting. Everybody said yes. I had to keep getting a bigger room. And when came, you couldn't get a word in edgewise. The poor speaker, no one was paying attention to her because they just wanted to meet each other. And towards the end, and think about it, 10 years ago, LinkedIn wasn't even much of a thing yet. Someone was like, I'm putting a LinkedIn group together and we're going to all get connected. And then they were like, do that again. And they were like, and I'll bring 5 friends. And so literally I was like the shepherd, but it wasn't like I envisioned it in, as a plan. I just sort of said, sure. And after a while, I was like, well, I'm not paying for your cocktails anymore. So like you can, I'll give $100 towards the venue or whatever. And it became just such a powerful, safe place for these senior women. Like if you live long enough, your friends start running the world. But the other thing that's interesting is I sort of was like interrogating, like, why are they so hungry? What is it about this? There's some interesting things. We're the first generation of us, Heather, you and I, and I assume a bunch of people listening. We've never before had a generation of women with this much education, operational expertise. Like I've been working and leading for 30 years, and we have more power, influence, and wealth than women have ever had collectively, ever. And so all of
that gives me chills. Let me just stop for that. Let me just stop for a second. We got to take that in. We really have to take that in.
Right.
And receive it and accept it as real. Yeah. And if the men aren't here listening to the show, believe me, they're already allies because they're listening to my show. So I appreciate you. I love
men. I'm married to a man I've been with my husband for 35 years.
Wow.
So,
good for you.
And I'll tell you, I also have a lot of opinions about marriage and lives with each other. He would not have liked to be the primary breadwinner and responsible for financing our entire family and my children's education. He really likes that we have a partnership and a balance, and that I worked. And so I think there's a lot of men for whom early heart attacks and other things have happened because of the extraordinary stress of maintaining the family, for example. I think balance is best for everybody. And, some people are the woman stronger and can make more money, and some it's the man. So giving each of you fair opportunity to both thrive and to contribute whatever's right for your family, I think is super important.
It is. It's very much.
I love men, but women are in the zenith of opportunity.
Yes.
And if you think about it, like I had a retreat with 20 women this weekend. It was just so yummy. They're all investors in my venture firm. I'm also the general partner of a venture firm we birthed out of How Women Lead. And since you hear everybody introduce themselves, and you're like, oh my God, we could do anything. There is nothing we cannot do if we all lock arms and do it together. Women have 52% of the wealth today. And there's a massive wealth transfer that's about to happen as people transfer their wealth or move on to the beyond. Yes. And women are projected to have 60% of the wealth by 2030. So my question to you as you hear this is, what are we going to do with it? Are we going to change the structures that were painful for us and cost us our health and our emotional well-being and our career trajectory slowdowns and things that have happened because of the box was made for the white guys? Can we create new types of companies and new environments? And can women with their wealth now hold leaders accountable? You know,
Mm,
I'm an advisory board member to a firm that invests in ESG, environmental
yeah.
sustainability and good governance. And we are big shareholders in Tesla. We were bigger before. We've changed some of that because of the leadership at Tesla. And we did a shareholder proposal and said, you need to do thing for the environment, but it's not doing the right thing for its employees.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that that's a very
So-
good point with when we think about just leadership at heart generally, what are we going to do with the choices we all have? Because the key is that we all have choices. And if any of us think
Yeah.
that we are choiceless and that we don't have choices, we are really fooling ourselves.
Yeah.
I have this book that it isn't out yet. It's coming out in February, and it's called The Art of Self-Leadership. And the reason why I decided to create that is I was kind of getting a little worn down by hearing people in general, not just women, but just generally people in general in the audiences I speak to, kind of putting off their abilities to be the people they wanted to be or show up in different ways because of some other person, like a boss, the executive leadership team, some other force in the world, but not themselves. And I kept thinking, so basically, I can't do this because XYZ wouldn't let me.
Oh, you're a victim. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. And it just
I don't do so well with that.
that kind of thing really, it gnaws on me. Not
Me
that
too.
I'm not saying I have never in my entire life had a victim. That's not what I'm saying. People who listen to this, I'm not that person. But I do know, because of choices I've made, because of the past I've had, that I can choose to be a different person very much tomorrow. And we all have choices. And so some of the stuff you're talking about really, leads on to some of that. We
And
all
you're
have a
giving
choice.
away so much of your personal power when you blame somebody else for anything you weren't able to do. And if you do it more than once, if you do it very often, you should interrogate where that's coming from, because that's going to hold you back.
It absolutely
That's what
will.
I think.
It will.
Yeah.
So now we've reached a point in the podcast where I always like to ask the guests, like, what, where, do you remember a time when you were not that leader with heart, where maybe it was a specific exchange, something that happened where you just not demonstrate caring leadership? What did that look like specifically, like in the story you're going to tell? And then what did you do, or like, what was the trigger that put you on the other side to just make you become a little bit more enlightened in the moment?
Well, okay. So I'm a social worker by training. So let's just start with saying my whole orientation in the world is social justice. So caring and heart are what I want to always be showing up as. Now, the first time you lead, when I was a CEO for the first time, I remember trying to figure out, I was like, I want to be a feminist leader. Well, what is that? What does that really mean? And I remember working with this executive coach, and she was like, okay, because I was struggling with should we all agree on everything? And before we move forward, or when should I delegate? When should I be directive? And she said to me, go dancing with your husband and let him lead, and come back and tell me how that goes for you. And that was fun. Because my husband's really sweet, and he likes for me to lead, and likes to, he's always checking in with me. So we were tripping all over and stuff. It was very funny. He can lead for a minute, but at a certain point, it becomes very wishy-washy. And she was like, that's what your team feels like, because you are not being clear enough. And you think you're doing something good for people by, being democratic, but really they're aggravated that you're not actually taking the mantle of responsibility you were given, or that your title that you're supposed to have. So I think there was part of that. And so what I would do is I would then over-index, I think, on the accountability side of, getting people to produce, and, trying to figure out how to inspire people and then hold them accountable. It's just I think it's a lifelong journey. I'm still probably struggling with it. And now at my age, after I've been a CEO for 100 years, sometimes I'm just like, oh my God, I'm having the same conversations I had 25 years ago. So sometimes I'm not patient anymore, but I try really hard. I have good intentions.
Well, I think that's good. And so then for you, when you were over indexed, was there something for you that made you want to not show up in that way? Or is there something like, did you end up getting a coach? What was the thing, like a trigger for you
My
that wanted you to
executive
change?
coach was, I've had an executive coach always as a leader. And it's really important because then you can catch it really quickly. That executive coach helped me realize how to lead in a way where it's much more clear when I was deciding and when I was delegating decision making, how to not micromanage, how to, you think you're protecting the company or helping people sometimes by controlling and micromanaging, and it's terrible. People hate it, and it disempowers them and makes them feel like they barely want to show up for work and they're going to do the minimum because you're going to redo it anyway. You don't want to be that person. I don't know that I was really that in a big way, but enough that I needed coaching to keep. And believe me, I feel like it's constant. I'm always reshuffling how I lead and how I show up to be aligned with my values and my capacity. I'm very different as a leader now than I was when I was 30 years old.
Aren't we all?
You can only do so much, right? Different life
Exactly.
stage. So
Yeah,
get
we
an
definitely.
executive coach that you trust will be honest with you, and really give you good tools, not just be,
Love.
I am a charismatic enough leader that I can have sycophantic coaches if I'm not careful. People who just say, "You're so great."
Yeah.
Like, well, that's not helpful.
No,
I
not
just
helpful.
$250 to hear that. That's not good.
No, I can just like I can actually record myself and listen back to the audio. Okay, well, thank you for that. Thank you for that. It's not always easy to admit when we aren't perfect, because there's so many eyes on us in workplaces, period. Just leaders generally, women definitely, specifically, minorities even more so. So the eyes are on us. The eyes are on us all the time, and
As
so
a
it's not
woman of
easy.
color, you have to be so much better. It literally, and in so many ways, it feels like as women, especially women of color, like somehow if you don't do the perfect thing, it represents everybody that's like you.
Yeah, which is ridiculous. Yeah,
Yeah, it's outrageous.
it really is. Well, okay, so now we're at the point of the podcast where you get to ask me a question. Like, what question would you like to ask me? Then I'll answer as honestly as I can.
Well, I would love to hear from you. If you ask these questions to, all of your guests, and I know you've got to have a strong point of view. So what do you think is the most powerful lesson you've heard about how to be a heartful leader? And how do you get there? What is the tool or the resource you need?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I have now, gosh, or it's like 350 episodes or something like that. I think that the number one thing is self-leadership. When I look at my book, The Art of Caring Leadership, that came from this book in 2020, or this podcast in 2021. I went through every single show and I looked at I was looking at all the little seeds of greatness and things that are in there. And it ended up that like the biggest chunk of that book, the first chapter and the biggest chunk is about self-leadership. And so I think the most important thing we do is to lead ourselves well and figure out what that means for us. And that's the reason why I decided to do this book on it, because I felt like let's give you kind of a framework to really consider what self-leadership is, and then how you can kind of live it in a much more strong way than you. Again, no blame, making good choices, all those things, right? So I think self-leadership and having like practices and habits and things that pour into us, that fill us up, because and this is just like, obviously it's just all leaders, it's 10x when it's a female leader, because more often than not all the time, but more often than not, we have raised kids or are raising children, and so much of us is drained from that. Let's just be clear, I love my children, but there's a lot drained from having 4 kids, and so how do I then kind of reinstitute the hydration, like putting that drain back into me, and then allowing me to be able to shine the brightest that I can. So I think that's the biggest one.
I have to tell you the moments where I where I was not able to lead well were when I was not emotionally resilient because I was too tired and I wasn't doing anyone a favor. It's just better to take the afternoon off and go take a nap, because you don't show up as your best self. And I have guidelines for myself about things that I, never be a mean girl, always be a fierce advocate for other women, like say yes to helping other people, and reinforce other people's voice, and all those things that I care about deeply, it's much harder to do when I'm super tired.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like, and I end up going inward. So the thing that I want as far as being a caring leader becomes the thing I just can't do because I haven't given myself. And I'm kind of like a grumpy old mama and it's just not very fun. So I've learned, like, I start off the day, I load into myself very first, just
Oh,
the very
good.
first thing, it's loading into me. So yeah. So for those who are listening right now, no matter their background, where they are in the organizations, they could be founders, they could be entrepreneurs, they could be, mid-level managers, frontline. I mean, we're all over the place as it would like to be even high potentials that are listening in. What might be a couple pearls of wisdom you'd leave them with? Some things as we look at kind of just giving them some jumpstart, making them think about what's like some big important practices that might be small practices, but that really have a big impact in their leadership.
I work with the most powerful women in the world, literally. I work with women who are on public company boards, who are leading. Every one of them has, you can argue about whether you like this word or not, has imposter syndrome. And so you think you aren't enough, but that's endemic. All of us feel that way. And we all feel like somehow someone's going to figure out that we weren't what we espoused to be or whatever, right? And it's a gigantic waste of your time and energy. So if you haven't done work around self-limiting beliefs and things like somebody told you something when you were 8 and you somehow have decided there's something called confirmation bias. You look around throughout your life and you're like, oh, that confirms that I'm not whatever. And doing that work around what are the things that are true, what has really served me, and what is a new story I can tell myself about who I am, I think is probably the most important work you can do. We waste so much of our leadership potential and our emotional energy that we could be spending loving someone or leading something important when we are caught up in that stuff. And I can't even begin to tell you, I literally had a retreat this weekend with the most powerful women. I'm talking about people who have so much success and they across the board have those feelings. And some of them take a lot of energy. You can tell that people are on a spectrum, but the ones who like really have this story about why they're not. And it's like, wait, that was a coping mechanism and it's helped you get where you are. You could evolve from there if you want, but I think the other thing that's so important for all of us to know, have you ever done like the Enneagram or one of those personality tests? Okay, Myers-Briggs or whatever. The biggest thing you should know about those is that's where you are at today, but your goal is to not be over-identified with any one of those categories. It's not the overdevelopment of any one part of who you are is actually the biggest risk area. Overdeveloped, any strength becomes your weakness. And so, it just really understanding that we're all a work in progress. Be kind to yourself and let yourself grow and develop those other sides of yourself as well.
Love it so much. Thank you for coming on here. I really
My pleasure.
appreciate it. It's like having a cup of coffee or cocoa with a good friend. I really
I feel
appreciate
the
this
same.
time with you.
Thank you for what you're doing in the world. And I can't wait to read your book.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And everybody, thank you so much for listening to the Leadership of Heart podcast. Be well.